Greetings and welcome to 321 exams. This is Christian religious study. The topic we want to consider now is titled Supremacy of God. Supremacy of God. Performance objectives. What do we seek to know? The first one is we want to assess the religious situation in Israel at the time of Elijah and Ahab. Assess the religious situation in Israel at the time of two key individuals, a prophet, a major national prophet, and the king, Ahab, of that very country, Israel. The next thing we want to see is identify the characters involved in the contest on Mount Carmel. What is Mount Carmel? Mount Carmel is a platform in which two supreme beings, demonstrate their power, show who is supreme. And who are the people watching? The entire nation of Israel really want to see who is the God of Israel. So the platform where these two powers are being showcased, proven, is Mount Carmel. And who are the characters involved? Both God has their prophets. One is the God of Ba, while the other one is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So two prophets, two God. And where is the battleground? Mount Carmel. So we identify the characters involved as we continue in this class. The next performance objective, differentiate between God's power and that of Ba. We want to differentiate between the power of God and the power of this idol called Ba. Background to this study. Now, if you look at this very well, God himself established the nation called Israel. If you recall, Israel is a name given to Jacob. Jacob means supplanter, but God turned his name to a blessed one, which means Israel. That means Israel means the blessed one. God changed his name, and this Israel have 12 sons, which later become the 12th tribe in the land. Now, these 12 sons become a people in captivity in the land of Goshen in Egypt. And when they're in the wilderness, God had to build a nation out of them. It is in the wilderness they become a nation, they build a tribe, they have their different tents. God had to build a military, soldiers out of them, and they become a people and a nation to be reckoned with among their own areas, among the other nations in the world. Going forward, because in every nation there must be rules that govern them, God has to give them a constitution, a covenant that will govern them in the name of the 10 commandments. And God gave it to them through his minister, his prophet, his servant called Moses on Mount Sinai. So God has to give this nation 10 commandments that will govern their affair. And the first of these 10 commandments is that God said they should not worship any other God before him. Neither should they bow down for any image. You know why? God is a jealous God. He loves his people so much that he does not want them to bow for any other God. At that time, it was more of a theocracy system of government whereby the people are being ruled by a supreme being through his medium, a prophet or a priest. Until the time of Samuel, when the Israelites rejected him and his sons as king, as their leader. That was when God, out of annoyance, out of anger, had to give them king in the name of King Saul from the least tribe in Israel, the tribe of Benjamin. That is to say, it was Prophet Samuel that established monarchy system in Israel. So background to this story, when the Lord brought the Israelites out of Egypt, he established a new covenant with them in the form of the 10 commandments. These are like 10 constitutions who governs their affair. The next point, the first of this commandment forbid the Israelites from worshiping any other God beside the Almighty God that brought them out of Egypt. You see, the first commandment here, forbid them from worshiping any other God apart from God himself. That is why whenever the children of Israelites, turn against the worship of God, in most cases, God will leave them to the hands of their enemy, mostly the Philistine. They will take advantage of them, take over their crops, and by the time they cry back to God, God will always raise the judge that will deliver them. But it gets to a point that their sin is beyond what God can behold, and he have to let them out to the hand in captivity. That's why you see the kingdom of Egypt, you see Babylon have to take over them. So that's what happened whenever the children of Israel turn against God. The next point here, these ordinances and statutes which they must follow at all time to serve the Lord was given to them through Moses. It was Moses that God used to give them these 10 commandments. Do you know Moses spent 40 days on Mount Sinai for him to get these 10 commandments on the tablet? Now, having said that, having established the fact that the nation called Israel is God's firstborn, is a country that God does not joke with. God have already made a covenant with their forefathers, that is Abraham. He always tell them and remind them that I am the God, Jehovah God, the God of your father, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It is Jacob that become Israel, and Israel have 12 sons that become the 12th tribe of Israel. Now, God always remind them. So because of that, God have made covenant with their forefathers that you must always worship only me, and I will always be your God, you will be my people. And there's a 10th commandment that governs their affair. Now, whenever Israel worship any other God, God is not always at peace with them. Now, in the time of the reign of King Solomon, he made some wrong, unwise decision that makes God to be angry, and God had to divide the kingdom of Israel into two. 10 tribes and the other 2 tribes. One of them become the kingdom of Judea, and the other one become the kingdom of Israel. So we are focusing on the kings who reign in Israel. And the Bible recorded that in the book of Chronicles, that most of the kings that reign in Israel hardly please God. They always do otherwise. They always worship other image. They always lead the people astray. And one of them is King Ahab. So we're talking about the reign of King Ahab. It was recorded that at the time of King Ahab, it was the worst compared to all the kings that have reigned before him. So let's talk more about the reign of King Ahab. Before talking much about him, this story, the supremacy of God, there are key people that we must understand, know, learn about. The first one is the king of the land, Ahab, the queen of that land, Queen Jezebel, the prophet of the land, Prophet Elijah, then the commander in the household of King Ahab, Obadiah. Then we also talk about the 450 prophet of Baal. These are the people who have to the characters that goes in this story. Like I said, the kingdom of Israel, the nation Israel, is being splitted into 2 kingdoms in the reign of King Solomon as a result of his unwise decision. Now, one of the kingdom of Israel, one of the king there is named King Ahab. King Ahab. So during the reign of King Ahab, what happened? It was in his time, the time when he reigned, is when we now have this story titled The Supremacy of God. So the reign of King Ahab. During the reign of King Ahab, he married a foreigner. He married a foreigner from Sidon called Jezebel, the daughter of Edbar, king of Sodom. You see now, this very king, a king in Israel, King Ahab, married from another country, a foreigner, and a princess. He now marries this lady, become his own queen. The name of that queen is Queen Jezebel. Queen Jezebel. What happened after that? Jezebel therefore introduced the worship of a Sidonian god called Baal. Now, this very queen, Queen Jezebel, imported her own foreign god, the god in which they serve in their own land, the land of Sidon. He brought in their own god, their own idol in the land of Israel. What's the name of the idol? Baal. He brought it in. If it just like Solomon then, when he married many wives, those wives also brought in their wives, their own gods, the same way. So Jezebel imported her own god, Ba, in the land of Israel. And the king of Israel, who ought to know better, that God is a jealous God, that God will not permit this, that God will not condole any other god before him. But King Ahab do nothing about it. He permitted it. So Jezebel imported a foreign god in Israel called Ba. That is the god they worship in their own land. Not only that, she also come with 450 prophets that will help in the service and the worship of this very Ba, this very idol. 450 prophets that will conduct the service and the worshiping of this idol, Ba. She with her husband Ahab erected an altar for Ba. You see that now? The king of Israel, who ought to know better, and the wife he married, build an altar for this image, for this idol, Ba. Apart from that, in the reign of this very king, what happened again? Ahab equally made Asherah. This led to religion tension in Israel. Ahab equally made Asherah. This led to religion tension in Israel. The question is, what is Asherah? Asherah means a goddess, a female god. Some historians call it the wife of God. So that means apart from the worship of Ba in that land, King Ahab also permitted and allowed the worship of another image, another idol called Asherah. And the prophets of this very Asherah are also 450 in the same land where God has ordained to be his own land. So in the land of Israel, we have 900 prophets worshiping idols. 450 for Ba, 450 for Asherah. Jezebel persecuted the prophet of God by putting them to death, while the one that were alive went into hiding. Now you see, definitely some people will stand up to speak the truth. And who are those who want to guide the word of the Lord? Just like, for example, if you have a constitution in a country, you see the lawyers are there to protect the law, to interpret the law, to tell people whenever they are going astray. In this case, that's what the prophet also represents, the prophet of Jehovah God. As you are trying to tell the king, the queen, and the people of Israel that this need not to be done in the land of Israel. You must not worship any other God before the God of Jehovah, the God of Israel. God will not be happy with us. Look at the history. Whenever we worship any other image, God always dealt with us bitterly. He always leave us in the hands of the enemy. We are doing the wrong thing. But in as much as any prophet would like to speak up or voice out, definitely Jezebel will definitely kill them, persecute them. Because why? The military and the soldiers of the land of Israel are under the reign of King Ahab. And this is the queen we're talking about. The king and the queen are on one trend. So definitely the military are with the king because they command all the resources. So if there's any prophet who wants to speak against the worship of this idol, definitely they will put that prophet to death. And anyone who failed to even worship this idol, definitely that person will suffer persecution. So many prophets in that land were executed and persecuted. So those who refused to bow for that image went into hiding. They went to hide. So there is no prophet in the land of God, meaning the word of the Lord was extremely void in that land. The name of God is silent in that land. So nobody recognized God anymore. Now look at the next point. Apparently, Ahab, who is regarded as one of the worst kings in Israel, did not only sin, but he also made Israel to sin. There's one thing you worshiping an idol, serving another God, and there's another thing you leading the people, you misleading the people to worship another God. God does not joke with his people. So apart from Ahab and his queen worshiping this idol Ba, he also made Israel, the people of God. He influenced them, manipulated them, persuaded them to worship this idol Ba. And God was neglected. Moreover, those who will speak for God, the prophet, are persecuted, and the remaining one are hiding. Now, are you now saying that there is no more prophet in the land? One prophet still exists. What is the name of that prophet? Let's continue. Okay, the consequence of the action of King Ahab and his wife Jezebel. The consequence of these people neglecting the worship of God, the sovereignty of God in that land, the ordinances of God's commandments, the consequence of that, the aftermath, the punishment, the result of them leaving God and worshiping idol. What are they? The first one, God was annoyed. He therefore sent Elijah to Ahab. He sent a prophet to the king. Elijah was the only prophet at that time who was bold enough to speak against the unethical religious decision that the king is doing, to speak against the wrong thing that the king is doing in the land. So God was angry with them. He raised his prophet Elijah to the king to proclaim 3.5 years drought. 3.5 years drought in Israel as a punishment for abandoning him for the worship of an idol called Baal. So God had to punish the nation. He declared that there will not be rain for good 3.5 years. Can you stand that? This is a nation that are like agro-haline, a country that their major occupation, in fact, their occupation is agriculture occupation. Everything related to agriculture, the planting of crops and the rearing of animals, this is what they do. Now, what kind of agricultural business will survive without water? So for good 3.5 years, there is no rain in this land. And if there's no rain for 3.5 years, what do you expect? You expect famine, you expect hunger, you expect recession, and you expect death. Expect these things. We will continue with this in the next lesson. This brings us to the end of this lesson. See you in the next lesson.